on personal wellness. I just want to do a really quick introduction and thank you to our three panelists. On the far end there, we have Dr. Nikki Jones, who is an associate professor of psychology. And she's going to share some insights about mental wellness with us. We got Dr. Lucy Graham, who is I always get your title not quite right, our Director of Nursing Education in the ballpark.
You're close. You're
all right,
right
there we go. And she's going to share some insights, I think, about the
testing and some prevention.
Okay, testing and prevention. And then Dr. Mike Reeder, who's going to, I think, lead us off with some discussion just kind of where we're at with COVID right now, what are the things we know, what are the things we don't know, and kind of share some of those insights with us. I'll send them off when we're done and kind of give you some next steps and point you toward cookies, but otherwise I'm going to leave the stage and let them kind of get going. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Kurt. It's fun to be here. It's been quite a year, 2020, COVID. Not all of it's been very much fun for us, especially Lucy and I have been involved in some of the things that the school did and others, many others really. So I'll just talk about COVID a little bit. I had to look up some of this stuff. What does novel coronavirus mean? And basically it means that it's a coronavirus that has never been seen before. However, we've all had coronaviruses. A lot of common colds are coronaviruses. And the reason why they name it corona or COVID-19 is the CO is coronavirus, VI is virus, and D is disease, and it was named in 2019. Yeah. So, I was kidding with these guys. I've actually been watching This Week in Virology, which
He's revealing his inner nerd right now.
That's a very, which I've never done before, but there's a lot of information coming out on this, and it's super fast as far as how it's going. So Kurt asked us just to perhaps talk about about COVID and maybe answer some of the questions that we all have and maybe some tools that we would use, as something to get through this time or deal with, or tools to just to navigate those. Although we all laugh because even though we're up here on the panel, we're all super stressed about this past year anyway. So, and there's a lot of confusion. So I wanted to talk about a couple things. One is exercise and nutrition. I used to teach a class called Exercise is Medicine, and I think there's something to that. And it doesn't mean you have to be running marathons, but it's really pretty fascinating how your immune system can be enhanced by exercise. And again, there's all kinds of debates about how much and how often, but regular exercise is so important. And facetiously, I talk to people about, you should only exercise on the days that you eat, but just moving every day I think is so important. And again, your immune system responds to that better than any supplement or anything else that we could take. And then I'm a sports medicine guy, so I'm always interested in exercise, but really the last decade I've got much more interested in nutrition, and maybe that's because I got older as well, but there's a lot of information on the importance of nutrition and your immune system, and just by, again, taking care of yourself, and we can take some direct questions later, but your immune system gets fired up by what you're eating, or vice versa, it can be depressed by what we eat, and again, the obvious things are the ones that I'm talking about. Anti-inflammatory foods and fruits and vegetables really fire up that your immune system. So, as far as self-care goes, I think those are two important things. And it's not just your immune system, obviously. There's so many other benefits. And the other thing that Kurt asked me to talk about a little bit was masks. It's been interesting to watch the whole mask, politically and all the different ways it's been used. because we did in here, I didn't really have a slide to show, but I mean, there are some reasonable people that have studied this way before COVID that said that masks are helpful in decreasing, your exposure, and they can model this and look at it. And whether it's 40% or 70% or 80%, it's still remarkably helpful. And I had in another area, I talked with some of the guys from facilities and people from facilities about it as well. So there was a lot of questions about types of mask and things like that, but pretty much any mask is better than no mask. So we'll be glad. We're hoping to not talk for too long and then just take questions. So I'm going to turn over to Lucy.
Okay, thanks. Well, and I think just the mask thing also is there was a time, I remember as a kid there were no seatbelt rules, right? And we played a game coming home from church every Sunday where my brother and I would be in the back of the station wagon, and my father would go through a very curvy part of Kansas City, and we'd go flying back and forth on each side, and we called this, I don't know if it was crazy fun. It was something that we did, right? Not okay today, very illegal today, but we didn't wear seatbelts. You didn't have to. It wasn't a big deal. Now, I do it automatically. I think it's going to be the same thing potentially with masks. Initially, there's resistance. There are going to be people that never wear a seatbelt. There may be people that never wear a mask. But in the big scheme of things, we know it can certainly, the benefits outweigh any risk. There's really not much of a risk. So I think that we'll see that happening down the road as we get more used to it, if this continues longer than the next 6 to 12 months. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've been doing on campus. I get a lot of questions about what are we doing. I'm seeing a lot in the newspaper. I'm hearing things on the radio. CMU seems to be getting a lot of recognition for the efforts going on campus. And I think that what we're doing is pretty incredible in the multi-pronged approach in testing for COVID on campus. So not only are we doing the drive-through testing, so everybody was tested at the beginning of the year, the 4 big lanes in what Amy Bronson called the mini DIA, right? You drove in there under the big tents, and now we're down to 2. So we are doing everybody. Then we're doing random testing. So about 250 students, staff, and faculty every week are getting pulled to do random testing, and you make an appointment, and you go in that week, you get your anterior nary swab, so you're swabbing your own nose. We're also adding saliva testing now, which we hope will be even more usable down the road. We're still getting through the kinks, and that is thanks to our biology department. So that's been a wonderful collaboration. And then we are also doing effluent testing, thank you to the civil engineering department and students, that they're able to test the effluent of specific dorms and buildings. And when they see an increase in the amount of virus in that effluent, it's a marker of, hey, we better test this dorm or this area. Then we call that whole area and we bring them down to the testing site and we test all of those students or staff or faculty or wherever this increase has been as a way to then find whoever is positive and has caused that increase in the amount of virus in the sewage system. We can then get them isolated, quarantined, find out, how to prevent the spread. So there's really a lot of things going on campus. We also are very much involved with the Student Wellness Center and Community Hospital, so anybody with symptoms can certainly go there, as well as the drive-through testing site. And we're already making plans for the return in January and what that might look like. So I don't foresee any change in this multi-pronged testing approach going forward. I think that's going to stay very much the same. Happy to answer some questions a little bit later if you have any about that specifically. But I also wanted to put just a tiny plug in for, in the midst of COVID, the last thing we want is other disease and illness. And hopefully we won't be missing our students will stay healthy, we'll stay healthy. We won't miss class, our students won't miss class, we won't be hospitalized. We won't have any sequela or long-term problems from being sick. So we are putting together several different flu shot clinics that will be available to you all through the month of October. Historically, in my Compop class, we do a health fair for the student body. We can't really do that this year with COVID. So we've decided we're going to focus our efforts on flu shot clinics around campus. So look for information coming out in the next week to 10 days about when those will happen and where those will happen. You'll be able to sort of pre-register through the Student Wellness Center, through Community Hospital, and then get your flu shot easily at a time that's convenient to you that happens to be on campus. Our level 4 nursing students in the traditional BSN program are leading that effort. And we'll be available to do this all around the campus. I think if you are somebody who historically doesn't get the flu shot or feels that you don't usually get the flu, or you've had the flu shot and you got the flu, it's not always 100% of a matched vaccine, so it doesn't prevent the flu 100%. It can certainly make the course of illness much less. So you may not be as sick. You certainly probably won't be as sick for as long. Maybe you're sick for 5 or 6 days versus 20 days. So we will be encouraging that as a way to keep healthy on campus as well. But I think a lot of us are here today because we have had different kinds of stress and confusion and lack of ability to sleep well and all kinds of other stress related to not just COVID, but 2020 and everything happening in our world. And I'm hoping that Dr. Jones will speak to some of that.
Sure, thank you. And really quickly, I was the youngest of a large family, so my seat was on the hump in between my mom and my dad in the front. That was my seat as early as I can remember. I survived. Yeah. Anyway, just made me think about that. We also rolled around in the back of a van, but I won't talk about that later. Okay, so my job is to talk about mental wellness in general, all the things that may be impacting our wellness in this kind of weird time we're in. So just a brief discussion about what wellness is. There's kind of like 3 agreed upon principles. One is being able to handle all the stressors that are thrown at you. 2 is being productive at work. And 3 is this idea of living up to your fullest potential. And so I don't know about you all, but I'm struggling in all 3 of these areas. And I will admit that I don't feel like I'm being as productive as work as I used to. Just let that fall on deaf ears there, Kurt. I think we could probably all agree that we're there. So I'll just go ahead and kind of go through some stressors. I'll tell you, my stress started on March 13th. I know the day. It's the last day I took my children to Walmart. Okay? No masks yet, but we were aware. It was 2 days, 3 days after we found out we were going to at least go a week remote before, after spring break. That's all we had at that point. Got to Walmart, said, kids don't touch anything. I really wiped down like the front of the cart, but the perimeter as well, because they like to hang on and the sides. We go in, and then my daughter, and I did a really good job at it too. I was really proud. My daughter starts kind of trying to touch everything, and I said, Lily, she's 4, get into the cart. You're just going to sit in the cart. Okay, I'm going to protect her. So at one point, I was getting something off a shelf, and I was confused because I don't regularly go to Walmart, trying to find something I was looking for, and all of a sudden I hear a woman go, oh, honey, don't lick that. And I turn around, and my daughter found the one spot I did not wipe down, which is the back of where kids sit and lean. She was sitting in the actual cart, and she was sitting there licking it and sucking on it. And at that point, I have to tell you, not only did I feel like inferior as a mother and some other mothers telling me how to mother and recognizing all of this, but I was like, and it began. And that's when the stress around COVID specifically began for me. Before that, I was like, oh, we'll be okay, we'll be safe. And then my children are, on any given day, licking Walmart carts is disgusting, but let's add COVID into it. So from there, I just made a list, I'll just show you how long it is, of all the stressors that we're probably all going through. I'm gonna just go through them. So after that, it's in chronological order, we had lockdown. Then there was the toilet paper, where we really had to have discussions about what will we do? Like, what is our plan at this point when we don't have any more toilet paper? Empty food shelves that, although I know I can find food, it doesn't mean that it didn't make your heart go a little bit like, oh gosh, what's going to happen? Throwing all the classes online on a dime, although I know we got an extra week, it still felt really fast. Then we began teaching our own children, canceling birthday parties, canceling vacations. What that led to is not seeing friends and family. For me, my family's on the East Coast. I haven't seen them in over a year. Then we move into racial injustice protests. Let's just throw more onto our plate here. Seeing a man be murdered by cops, if you happen to watch that video, and remembering it and not being able to forget it. Let's go ahead and throw in wildfires into the mix. Why not? And then politics has just really, around all of these things, just exploded to be a polarized mess, it feels like, in a debate about everything. And it really does feel that we are at a point where our democracy is really fragile, in my opinion. And it's leading to some stress for me. And then now back, changing classes up, recording lectures to the point where it just makes me want to probably rip my eyeballs out because I'm so tired of recording lectures. Sorry, Josh, but that's where I am. Creating safe classrooms now, adding to your job descriptions, whether you're faculty or staff, changing job descriptions. And let's not forget the most daunting one, the coin shortage. I mean, everywhere you go, there's a coin shortage now. All these things that we were not expecting back in March to occur, the day I freaked out about my kids, I could not have foreseen this happening. But we are here. And so we go back to this idea of how can we be well and practice wellness when we have all of these stressors that are being thrown at us that we're probably not able to handle very well. And we just need to be honest about it. Does it impact our productivity at work? I believe it does. And does it impact our ability to kind of achieve our fullest potential? I believe it does. And so you're not alone if you're struggling. Some of the things to point out is what our research is now showing us about COVID in general, is it's leading to increased rates of anxiety, depression, more substance use, and suicide attempts. And so with that, if you had a previously diagnosed mental illness such as PTSD, anxiety, and depression, it skyrocketed those diagnoses even more. To like 70% of those individuals have a new diagnosis of anxiety or PTSD or depression now since COVID. And that's just with COVID. We're not talking about all of the other things that are impacting us. So what happens when we're thrown all these stressors? Our body's gonna respond in a lot of different ways. As you all were mentioning, like our eating is gonna probably change to not be in the healthy way that we need it to be. We are not sleeping as much, or maybe we're sleeping too much. Issues with concentrations, fatigue, low energy really is something that can just bring us down. But issues with our mood and isolation can come too. So isolation on top of COVID isolation. Talk about a lot of time by yourself. Then we go into this notion of mood swings, irritability, anger, frustration. You combine all of these things, and it's going to be taxing on not only our mental health, but I think on our physical health. And that's what I was talking in this discussion to prepare for this with Lucy and Mike, is at a time when we need our immune systems to be top, on top and doing what they need to do, we are taxing it with the stress of all of these things that's being thrown at us. And I don't know if you all want to speak to, I know you spoke about like foods and anti-inflammatory foods and that being important for for our physical kind of wellness, but what about stress? How does that then kind of impact our physical wellness as well?
Do you want to go? Well, I can speak to the cortisol. So right when we feel that stress, we ramp up. Our body goes into this sort of fight or flight in some responses, and we get these heightened levels of cortisol, which it's great if we're being chased by a grizzly bear. Mm-hmm. It's not great when we are trying to go to sleep at night and we can't, and we keep having these surges of these hormones. And so part of handling that stress is an outlet for it, right? So this is ramping up. What is it that works for you? And we'll talk about that. Sometimes it's exercise, sometimes it's diet, sometimes it's meditation or other mindfulness, sometimes it is not doing any screen time, sometimes it's taking a break from news or social media. It really, there's all kinds of ways to mitigate those surges of these hormones in our bodies, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's very specific to each person, and you really have to find that. I mean, the big joke in my family is if I can't go running, nobody wants to be in my house. So I'm a runner, and if I feel stressed, I'm out the door. And that's how I handle, I think, that surge of hormone levels. And it's different for everybody. I have other friends who it's an immediate moment where they go into a quiet space and they will try to go through a mindfulness exercise or they will meditate. And that works to bring their levels down. So it's an experimentation, and you figure out what works.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If I haven't done something exercise-wise, but everybody's going to be different, and taking care of athletes for a long time, I think a lot of people medicate themselves with their movement or those kind of things, and when it's taken away from them, they have difficulty managing that. And I think we probably all are dealing with that because our routines are being affected.
And then sleep hygiene is a big,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think sleep has been something difficult for myself and lots of people. What do you recommend?
For me, that's my indicator that my stress levels are too high is when I start having insomnia. There's a couple of things that leads to it is when I stop doing regular exercise, it's like a direct correlation there that I start having insomnia. But then whenever I am laying there and I can't get those ruminative thoughts out of my mind about something somebody said on Facebook that's really disappointed me in that individual in today's kind of reality, that's an indication too. And that can impact my sleep. So some of the best things for my sleep in particular is that regular exercise, getting that cardio in, but as well as being aware of if I am getting some of those ruminative thoughts, paying attention to what that is and maybe setting some boundaries around that issue. So for me, as you were mentioning, maybe sometimes some things are too taxing, I was telling these two right before we started, it was about 3 weeks ago, I just got off of Facebook. Personally, for me, I had to take a step back and set some boundaries around information I was consuming. It might be for you that it's watching the news too much, and it really is taxing us. And so kind of paying attention to the fatigue that we're experiencing and what could be leading to these things. There's actually research out there, it's called feed fatigue. Overall, we know that it's taxing people. We're getting into arguments on social media. We're taxed by this information that's being thrown at us. The other thing that goes along with that, I think that impacts my ability to sleep too, has been something that as helping professions we all have learned about, is this idea of compassion fatigue, just feeling the weight of your clients and your patients' issues. I think that we could all out here, especially with the racial justice issues and protests and seeing all of these things happen, many of us are probably feeling that fatigue to the point where it's you don't even notice that another person has been killed. And it's oh, somebody else was shot? Okay. It's it just kind of goes past you, but at the same time, it also impacts us. And so these things, for me personally, are taxing on my ability to get a good night's sleep. And then your issue is if I haven't run, family watch out. If I haven't slept, family watch out. I have no room for patience for my children. I feel like a bad mother at those times when I'm just short and tired, and then that just compounds the guilt. We could talk for hours about that. But and so it's really noticing what impacts you, and for me it's sleep. And I think the other thing is the idea of, you're talking about good sleep hygiene. We know overall some of the things that are best around sleep is going to bed and waking up at the same exact time every day. I think it's easier for us who are not in college, older. It gets a little easier to stay on a routine. White noise machines are also something that has been kind of shown to help to not kind of allow things to wake you up, being in a cool environment and stuff like that. More recently as well, we're kind of combining the meditation piece. There's an app called Headspace. I don't know if any of you know about this. So I've started using that to help me with my insomnia as well. And so they have some great sleep meditations, and since I've started using that, it is just phenomenal, the impact that it's had on helping me practice mindfulness in the moment to be able to be present and not allow those things really tax me. So there's a whole host of different things you can do, and it really is individualized for sure.
That's great. Well, and I think that a big message I'm hearing is that it's all normal to have these feelings, right? We all are going through something. It would be unusual for somebody to be sailing through this. And I think the big issue is what do we need individually? You know, what are the menu options? What can we think about? What can we do? I know that I had a recent experience that I'm not very proud of. I went to the DMV because I had to. I didn't want to be there. I had to be there. I have a new car. The temp plate was expiring. I'd been busy. I didn't get there. I had that day to get it done. So it wasn't like I was going to a store that if I didn't like what I saw, I could walk out on. I went in, and maybe half of the patrons were in masks, and maybe half of the workers were in masks. And I immediately see a woman who's obviously going through chemotherapy. So my mama bear nurse hackles go up, and I'm like, oh my, I'm like talking to this crowd. Okay, so might have been a little bit of yelling, Dr. Jones. I kind of lost it in this crowd, and I thought, what has happened? I am not a yeller. Like, I'm not somebody who makes a fuss. If I walked in somewhere and I didn't like what I saw, I would just turn around and leave and go somewhere else, but I had to be there. And I felt very protective of this woman who was obviously going through chemotherapy. Most of the patrons were not in masks, and so two sheepish-looking young men, as they see this middle-aged woman losing it, pull their bandanas up. But I thought, well, what is that about? Like, what the heck has just happened? Because I am pretty demure. I'm not super, like, I can do confrontation, but I'm not typically somebody who confronts strangers about mask use, let's say.
I have an idea. I am not your clinician, so I can't
But you could
diagnose
be.
you. I think as we all are feeling this, the weight of what's going on is like we have essentially control over nothing at this point in our lives. Like, nobody can control this pandemic. Nobody can control the injustices. Nobody can control the outcome of the election, whatever way you want it to go. Like, it feels like we have no control, and so what we tend to do in situations where we have no control is we try to find some control in some way. For me, mask wearing is my control. I don't know if it might be your feeling of control a little bit, that if we just do this, people, we could get through this, right? Mm-hmm. And so when seeing people not wearing masks, which my hackles go up, and I'm not even a nurse, I get more angry and judgmental, I guess, than kind of lashing out. Just in my mind, I'm really pissed at all these people and like not being respectful. And I think respect is like our most valuable asset as humans. And so it's about like trying to just have, I think, a little bit of control. And in that situation, you know what could work and what could change this. And you didn't have that. And so when we don't have control, that leads to increases in anxiety. And so we can directly look at that kind of relationship as well. And so what do we try to do? We try to get control. Mm-hmm. So you're yelling, I would imagine. Warranted, I mean, it got you some control, right?
Yeah, yeah, I sure did. Got me some looks and some fingers, but it also got me some control. I think we're really interested in other questions that you all may have or specific issues you would like to talk about. So I don't know how we're doing on time. Anybody with any specific questions, or you can certainly interrupt at any time. I had a question for Mike while you all are thinking, because I think that this has come up not just with masks, but in the ways that we keep safe, right? We've got the social distance and we wear our masks, we're washing our hands, we're not touching our face. But what about the aerosolization? What do we know right now about? Do we worry in our buildings? Am I in my office without my mask on? Am I putting myself at risk when I'm alone? I mean, these are some of the questions that my faculty is asking, and I just wondered if you've got, Mike's been doing a lot of the background research for those of us working on the testing effort around campus, so we've relied on him really heavily to kind of aggregate that literature for us.
Again, a little bit of the nerd reference, but I did want to mention, before I go to that, we're talking about this thing. This is pretty epic, because when you look at the history of pandemics and epidemics and things like that, you know, it's been 110 years since anything really close to that. So obviously nothing in, you know, even our parents' lifetime. So really the Spanish flu is the last one that had this type of worldwide, you know, effect. So I think I mean, sometimes when you look at that, you're like, wow, that's, because, you know, we hear Ebola and we had some things like that, but nothing has been like this. So I think that's pretty interesting. But the aerosolization, and one of the things I like to show when I'm talking about masks is just some of the videos that there's all these, it's pretty interesting. There's people that this is what they do. They study basically if I cough, what happens to the things that come out my mouth, or if I'm just talking or singing or yelling. They do all those types of studies, and they just use markers and things like that. So basically, the 6-foot rule is somewhat, I don't want to say pull out of the air, but that basically there's some science behind it, but it's not exact, but it's a reasonable distance. Most of the stuff, if I'm talking to Lucy in a normal voice, most droplets are going to be at most 3 or 4 feet. I mean, all of you have been around somebody that maybe goes past 3 or 4 feet, you know, when they're talking, but most of the time it's going to be 3 to 4 feet. The question is, this whole thing about aerosolization is when we're talking, or like measles viruses, they'll be in the room the next day. They will hang out in the size of the virus and things like that. So, you know, it's very contagious. So there's been a lot of debates about this virus, and most people think that it is probably a part of transmission, but not a large part of transmission. But I think it's something we're still going to find out. I'd say most of the people that I'm looking at and seeing are, most of the time I'm giving it to you right now when we're face to face.
And then is there, and we didn't practice this, so you can stop me anytime, but it led to another question that I had. So I'm wondering about the inoculation. So if you have your mask on, you are sharing your keeping your distance, then in some diseases, the less inoculate, so the less amount of virus that gets into your body, the less severe the course is. There's sometimes a direct relation to the amount of the virus that you get in your body to the severity of the disease. Is that panning out with COVID?
Yes, that's true here too. That's what I think that one of the reasons why they think masks, and again, this isn't just coronavirus, there's a bunch of people have been studying this for a long time, looking at viral transmission, that the less that I transmit to you, the sicker that you're going to be. That's in general.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's another helpful thing to know. I don't know how many of you are having trouble with people in the office or the classroom or your work areas not wearing masks. Anybody here? A couple? And do you say anything? Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's very difficult to know what to do.
Right.
Because, you know, a lot of times they're eating or drinking, and, you know, you don't want to interrupt them.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what to do about it.
Right, and I don't know if everyone can hear her, but what she's saying is that in her library setting, there are people who will be eating and drinking, and so often not wearing a mask, and maybe a little bit too long. I've had the student, even in nursing, just about 1 or 2, but they'll pull the mask down and then they do this, right, with their water bottle for like 20 minutes, right? They're not drinking, they're just not. And so it's that sort of thing. Jesse?
I'll speak to the asymptomatic. There's still, there's still a fair amount of debate because how do you assess that? And, if we could test everybody, which really someday maybe we'll be able to do that, I think that the technology is really fascinating, how fast it's advancing, and pretty soon it'll be just like a home pregnancy test, I think, eventually. And, you'll take it before you go to work, and even if you're asymptomatic. But as far as knowing how many asymptomatic people, it's probably way more, I think. I mean, a lot of people think it's a much higher number. And that may speak to the fact that there's probably a little bit more chance of herd immunity with more people that were asymptomatic. But I think it's still I think it's still an unknown. And I think, well, right where we are on a college campus is an area where there are probably a lot of asymptomatic, because that's, the younger age group generally has been asymptomatic for a lot of different reasons. Some of it is their immune system is more robust. So yeah, I don't know if I can, it's probably not a great answer, but because I don't know that we know exactly. Do you have any other thoughts on?
Well, we've been doing a lot of random testing of dorms, things like that. So we are finding asymptomatic people. We certainly, when I sort of nerd out on the Mesa County data dashboard, which is my morning routine, probably not healthy. I stopped doing it at night. That helped.
I do it every day.
Okay, so now I do it in the morning.
I do
but
it.
I look at a couple things. I'll see these huge jumps in numbers in Mesa County, right? All of a sudden, increase in COVID cases from our previous day, 20. And I'm like, what? What the heck is that? And then I will look at how many patients are hospitalized. Maybe it's 1 or 2. And then I look at mortality rates. We're still at 5. So even if, and again, I'm looking really in our community right now. So at this asymptomatic transmission in our community, it seems to be happening, but it doesn't seem to be resulting in a lot of morbidity or a lot of sickness, certainly not increasing mortality. So I think if that transmission, it's happening probably more within the same grouped folks, but that's really supposition and how I've looked at the data over time, and then knowing what we've been doing on campus and what we've been seeing. And I think a lot of that speaks to this early mitigation. Identify positive cases early and quarantine, and then a lot of contact tracing. So we're kind of analyzing data in buckets as it comes in. So we have those random people that come to test. We have those folks that have come to us, what we call targeted testing, maybe contact tracing, or maybe they're from a dorm where we've seen a spike in the effluent viral copies. And most of those folks do not have symptoms, but we're able to identify people and isolate them that way. So that's been pretty effective in containing it, but it's a huge issue. And if you read the national news and you look at national websites and some of the national data, you'll see that that 20 to 29-year-old, that asymptomatic, is happening most in that 20 to 29-year-old group, and they seem to be resulting, causing a variety of infections depending on where they are living in their communities. So that's that piece, but I'm happy to speak more to that.
And so addressing your question, Jesse, in the United States in general, compared to other countries, we are very self-reliant individuals. We have a sense that we don't have problems, or if we do, we don't need to acknowledge them because that signals weakness. I would argue as a clinician that actually acknowledging is a strength, but people don't think the same way I do. And so what ends up happening is you have a situation where I think we were already at a place where prior to COVID, we were a pretty stressed nation, really kind of focused on a lot of the wrong things, not taking care of ourselves being one of them. And then you add in this stress and this idea that we need to be self-reliant, nobody has problems, we don't seek help when we do, and it does lend to a lot of people denying kind of their experiences. And that's not going to do anyone any good. So first off, if we don't acknowledge what we're going through and we literally engage in denial to ourselves, let's start out like that. Oh, I'm okay. I'm just walking out. My kid just licked the Walmart cart, but I'm okay. They're not going to get sick at all. That's not going to help, because what's going to end up happening is it'll come out somehow, those emotions of fear, those emotions of sadness, of grief, of loss, whatever we're experiencing. So a lot of times they come out somatically in people, which then turns out to look like physical illness. So you'll see like increased rates of neck tension, back problems, headaches, stuff like that, and then the other impact on the sleep and eating issues and the whole host of cognitive things. I think what happens too is when we take some time to just be real and acknowledge to our family, our friends, to our coworkers, hey, I'm not doing well. I am not okay. What it does on one hand is it gives permission for the person that you're talking to feel like, oh, I don't have to rely on myself too. I can acknowledge that I'm not okay. It doesn't mean I'm weak if this person's acknowledging it as well, number one. Secondly, we know that social support is one of our best kind of buffers against stress that we have out there, especially if it's positive social support. Somebody that's going to support you and help you and say, you know what, I'm here with you, and it's okay that you're not okay. You have every right to be struggling. That really does help us to, there's like studies out there that show that you look at the physiological arousal when we put people in a stressful event, you know, they go into that fight or flight response. And what do you do if you put another person just in the same room with them, just there? It mitigates that fight or flight response, and it brings it down. So imagine then what happens when you actually communicate emotionally and cognitively with someone about your stressors. It gets to the place where you're not in denial, you're not holding it all in, and you then hopefully can kind of get some of that out. It normalizes it, and it really does have a positive impact in the long run on us, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I don't know if I answered your question. I could speak to it further. Or, okay.
So did you hear that? Okay.
I think if I understood you, were like, how do we know when we're turning the corner, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a great question. I think it's still in the phase of unknown. What's interesting, the Spanish flu had several waves, and what's really interesting, actually, it probably started in the United States, but we sent soldiers over to World War I and to Spain, and then it became the Spanish flu. But it's had several waves, and I had referenced a couple things like Ebola and some things like that. Ebola's super high mortality. It's very contagious. And SARS a few years ago, they worried about SARS kind of the same way, and then all of a sudden it just turned off. And they still can't really explain why that happened. So I don't think there's a really good way to know for sure. I can say that like in Italy, there's pretty good evidence that the virus is less virulent than it has been. There has, and then of course you can look on the news and sometimes you'll see a study that, you know, has seen mutations, but more recently there's been the more, even though the case numbers are still been pretty high, the mortality rate seems to have been much lower. So I don't think we have a great way to know how we're turning the corner.
I think maybe looking at New York as an example, they had right early on some of the worst epicenters of outbreak, and then they were able to manage and mitigate and flatline where they were seeing less and less cases every day, less and less deaths every day. Obviously that's one state, but I think if we see the US in general starting to have less cases being reported and less deaths overall, then we can say I think we're making some headway. But right now with this sort of state by state, you sort of have to look at it state by state because every state is doing differently. And if anybody is interested, Johns Hopkins website has a really great site where you can see state by state what are those trends. which states are spiking, which states are doing well, and then you can dig a little bit more into why that might be. So that's another interesting way to see. Unfortunately, we don't have a great federal plan, so it's kind of state by state right now, but it does break it down. And I think when you start seeing those less cases and you start seeing less deaths, less hospitalizations, then you can say we're getting somewhere. But right now, that's happening kind of in spotty ways around our country. And that website, again, can show you. If you're interested, like if you're gonna go somewhere over Thanksgiving, find me and I'll show you that website. You can decide whether or not to go based on that data.
I can kind of hear.
No, sorry.
So the sleep hygiene was probably just one manifestation of these kind of, just an example essentially, right?
Sleep issues?
Your sleep hygiene example was just one sort of manifestation of issue to do with anxiety or something
Sure.
like that. And it seems to me we're not so maybe, I don't know, couple kind of point, we're not so well equipped to see where any of these kinds of manifestations are kind of on a spectrum when it comes to sort of mental health issues as we are with physical.
Yeah.
I mean, I get injured, I know pretty well. If I need to go to the hospital, or
Sure.
I can wait to see the doctor, or I can go to Walmart, or I can just hang out and talk. So how do you
Yeah.
deal with this kind of like, you're not feeling so well mentally or something like that. Now, how do you know where on the spectrum of resources should be sort of?
Sure. So are you asking, number one, like, what are the clues that you're not doing so well? And then where do you go? Yeah.
Versus the liquor store, just kidding.
Yeah. So that came out of her mouth, not mine. So I think, in general, like going back and normalizing this idea that we're not doing, all of us are probably not doing, thriving, meeting our fullest potential, acknowledging that. It's when you start noticing some key signs, I think, is significant isolation is one. So, like not answering the phone calls, not texting people when you just want to be alone by yourself. And this is coming from me. I'm a raging introvert. Like, I love being alone, but I even know when I start like dodging phone calls, dodging texts, don't want to be around people, would rather be under my covers. That's one clue. Having those thoughts that you can't stop. So the wheel that's just going around and around and around, and you cannot control your thoughts that are typically worrisome thoughts, doom, gloom type of thoughts. That's another indication that you would probably be going maybe not so in the right mental health direction. The issues with sleeping, changing, but weight loss and weight gain, that's just unexpected. And I know that's hard because it's like COVID 20, like freshman 20 back in the spring. So, but it's just really unexpected type of weight loss. And then when you also start having kind of thoughts of life is too hard. Like, this is so hard, I don't want to be here anymore. And it might not be that you're actively thinking about killing yourself, but starting to entertain those ideas of, man, I wish I could get COVID so I would just die. Like, those are some serious warning signs that things aren't well. Unfortunately, we don't have a Walgreens for mental health. So what I would say at that point, when somebody gets all the way down with a lot of those symptoms, it would be to follow up with a mental health provider. I know that we as staff here have the opportunity to reach out for our EAP. And Kurt might be able to kind of talk more to that later if you have questions about that. It's on the HR's website, I know. They offer some sessions, I believe, for free, and then I don't know how many is after that and what you would have to pay, but I do know that our insurance through CMU also covers mental health treatment as well. Prior to getting to, the really deep end where, and ultimately, if you can't function, that's the other thing I forgot. If you're just not being able to do things like shower regularly, whatever regular is for you, right? Some people that's not daily, and that's okay, but what's your regular hygiene routine. If you're not able to do that, if you're not able to take care of like the chores and responsibility within your home, And if you're just not able to get your work done, now I'll speak to the whole lack of productivity at work thing in a minute, if you want me to. I mean like severely, like you're 4 weeks past doing any grading. You're, and it's not because you're so busy at work, it's because you've just been isolating yourself, right? So all of that lack of like being a human also speaks to this need to reach out to a mental health provider. When it's like not that bad and you're not having thoughts of suicide and not entertaining kind of some of these ideas and you're able to function, but you just know you're not thriving, it could be things like doing some self-work first. So the exercise component that both were talking about is super important. It impacts my mental health so well. I've re-implemented yoga back into my life in the last couple of months. I used to do it very regularly before kids, and then I stopped. And so I've had to do that for me to just give me a sense of kind of balance and dealing with the chaos that's going on too. Doing whatever's good for you. Sometimes that's just getting out in nature. So we have research that shows just literally looking at pictures of nature actually decreases like our cognitive load. And I don't know about you all, but all of the Zoom meetings and being on my computer all the time is really taxing my cognitive load. And so being in nature, going out somewhere and just being in green space actually lends our brains to having a low effort state. And that can really just decrease a whole host of issues, metabolic issues that can go on in the body, but also can help to decrease our overall arousal levels too. And then I think the other thing that's really, really great, and you can find any of this anywhere if you don't know what Headspace is and you don't have it, there are so many like mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing things on YouTube. Breathing we don't do enough of in this. I mean, we do enough to stay alive, but we don't do it in the right way enough. So what that means is that we're very shallow breathers in the United States, and that actually keeps us in more of an aroused state. So forcing ourselves to engage in some deep breathing exercises, which you can find guided on YouTube all over the place, actually can help with some of those things too. So I guess I would say that the Walgreens experience is going and finding some resources on YouTube. Ultimately. I don't know if I answered completely what your question was.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you didn't answer it in the sense that, like, essentially you had to give me your own list, Whereas if if there was blood pouring out my arm, I would look at it and
Right.
I wouldn't need to consult a list. I would actually kind of somehow know what to do about it.
Right.
That's my point.
Sure.
Somehow we need to be handed this list of kind of like, there you are,
Sure.
there you are,
Sure. And I believe that we could probably get that, sent out to faculty from academic affairs. I think that would be really helpful and important for us all to have, just to know what are some of the warning signs that you're not okay.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
And staff,
as
yes,
well.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I came up here just in the nick of time. Huh?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I do think today hopefully starts a kind of a further discussion on that. I know Faculty Senate has been talking about, if nothing else, right, we can do things, I think, communally to get tips out there for helping with, I mean, the three of these, if you write them all down, like I've got 5 good things I can put in my hip pocket, right, for just kind of managing that sort of stress. I think we put out some of the HR resources that we already have, and we can keep putting those links out there. I don't know that we've got today, I don't know that we've got a long-term training session kind of thing to all turn us into Dr. Jones or anything like that, but I think as a long-term goal, I think I can sort of get on board with the idea that continuing to create and disseminate information that'll help us function in this regard, I think is useful. So I'm supportive of continuing this conversation, I think, is what I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, and Dr. Haas may not agree, but I think if you had ideas about what might help in your specific workplaces, I think we'd love to hear about them. We've thrown out some ideas of even having some students, everybody who knows me knows I love to involve our students, but having some kinesiology, nursing, and psych students working together on sort of a weekly toolkit, like something once a week, try these things every day this week, that just gives you some real tangible things. Here's the website, or here's the meditation, here's the walk, something that you don't have to think about. It's just there for you to use, and that may be one thing. I think certainly if you have needs in your areas and there are faculty or others of us that can come and help answer questions, I think there'd be lots of people that would be willing to do that as well. So I think just communicate with Dr. Haas.
Absolutely, yeah, send me emails. Truly this was intended to be kind of the start of hopefully a number of things that we can do going forward. Because I think, just acknowledging, I don't know anybody on this campus who's not pulling an extra load right now, is what it amounts to, either in their personal life or their work life or both or whatever. So I think figuring out ways that we can help each other and figuring out ways that, we can get the information to people that need it of the right kind, I think that's a conversation we want to start having. I do want to be mindful of your time. I know a lot of people probably blocked out the 3 or 4, so I'm going to go ahead and call it to a close. But like I say, send us email. You can continue the conversation if you've got time. There are, if I'm not turned around, there are cookies on this end, right, Joe? As you head out, you can grab cookies and tea. You could even be 6 feet apart and take off your mask. Please do thank these folks for sharing their expertise with us, though. I really appreciate it. And thank you for coming.